Remember the days before Nintendos and PlayStations, we had proper wooden toys to play with? Well, in this video, let me show you how to make a couple so you can go home and have some fun with the kids. So obviously when I was a kid, we didn't have cell phones or video games for that matter when I was quite young. And, but we did have yo-yos, and I was always kind of interested in being good at yo-yoing. And well, I never, ever got all that proficient at it. I was terrible at it. But it was a toy from my childhood that I felt, or I still feel, that kids would get a lot of use of and have a lot of fun with. So I want to show you how I made this. Now, you all know that one of my favorite toolpaths in our software is the molding toolpath, and that will allow us to create 3D shapes without having the 3D modeling capabilities of Aspire. And this is the perfect job for that. Now, I got a lot of inspiration for this yo-yo from an old project that Michael Tyler did called the Steampunk Yo-Yo. And actually I used his I extrapolated a cross section so I get the same sort of general shape that he had, thinking that he probably did a lot of research to figure out what that exact shape was. So I'm going to use that, and you'll see that in a second. So let's go ahead and have a look at how I use the molding toolpath to create this. So right now I have VCarve Desktop open. I've got one sheet showing. Now you have to promise me, don't use the tooling off this sheet for anything. This is going to be just for me to show you how I use the molding toolpath and some of the things that I took advantage of, which often maybe you won't be able to depending on what you're using the molding toolpath for. And like I've said many times before, just because a toolpath is given a name doesn't mean that that strategy is only used for that. Molding toolpath, make a yo-yo. Hey, that's pretty cool. So we can do all kinds of things. So what I have here is 4 circles. So obviously, these are the 2 halves of the yo-yo, and the center circle is where our dowel is going to go. Now, I'm going to use this center hole for part of the molding toolpath, which I'll explain in just a second. Now, up top here, at the top, we've got a cross section. Now, that literally is this shape of the yo-yo to the center or to the outside of that dowel hole, okay? Now, one thing that's important to remember when using the molding toolpath, if you're going to use it on a closed shape, it will always hang on the outside. It'll take that cross section, hang it off the outside of that shape. Unless you break that circle or you add a little bit of a gap, that's just what it's going to do. So I needed to have this inside circle here in order to make this shape kind of hang outside of that and meet up with the edge circle here. Now, that might not make any sense right now, but it will in a second. One thing about the cross section is that it's built to scale. So the height of that is exactly what I want it to be in my finished part. And the width of it is exactly what I want to fit between this circle and this circle, okay? So it's drawn to scale, which is kind of important when we get a little bit farther along here. So let's just jump over to our toolpaths tab for a second. And the first thing, like we always do, we're going to check out our material setup. Now, this is just sort of standard procedure when you're going to look at a file. So we have, and like I said, we're not going to use this to cut anything with, but I put in a material thickness that seemed useful, so 0.75 of an inch. That seems like a pretty decent thickness for 1/2 of a yo-yo. My XY datum for this particular case doesn't matter, but it's set to the bottom left. Be zeroing off the top of my material. There isn't any 3D component here. Again, that's the beauty of using the molding toolpath. I don't need a 3D component. I'm going to create that by running my tool along this drive curve, but following this profile as it goes. And so that's going to give me the nice 3D shape I'm looking for. And I've set up my rapid Z gaps and my home start position to be safe and appropriate for our machine. I never change those. They're always that way for the machine that I'll be using. So that's okay. So we're just going to click cancel. If I clicked OK, I get a warning that says I need to calculate some toolpaths, which I haven't shown you yet. So I'm not going to confuse you with that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to click on our molding toolpath. And it's pretty self-explanatory, but I'm going to go through it and review most of the steps along the way. Again, we have a great video called How to Use the Molding Toolpath that you can watch if you really want to do a deep dive into this. But for right now, I'm just going to look at most of the features that pertain to my job. And maybe touch on a couple others. So first of all, we have the information at the very top of our toolpath dialog here that tells you how to use it. It says to go ahead and select an inside vector or your drive rail, excuse me. Hold down the shift key and your cross section. So there we have it. Now, nothing has changed in the 3D view except for I have those two vectors selected. Now this is one of our tools that we haven't quite moved over or migrated fully over to the 3D view. So if I tile my 2D and my 3D view, then you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about over here in the 2D view. That's the inside circle, there's my cross section, and I'm actually hanging this cross section off this inside circle, and it's gonna I guess rotate it all around the outside of this, okay? So that's the only way we can actually tell that things are set up properly is if we look at our 2D view, and they look really good. Everything's pointing in the right direction, so that's perfect. I'm starting here with the circle on the inside or my drive rail, and I'm starting at this end of my cross section, so that's perfect. Over here I can set up my toolpath position. Now you'll notice something interesting about my cross section. It doesn't have the right hand leg that normally you would have if you were doing like a 2-rail sweep or something like that. This actually is going to be pushed to the very top of my material. So anything that's at the top of this vector is going to be at the top of my material unless I tell it different. And then it's going to follow that. I don't need that leg. Now, I don't need it for my yo-yo, but you might need it if you're going to create a molding that actually goes up one side and then comes down the other. Then you'll have to put part of a leg, or maybe you're going to need a full leg if you're actually going to cut out a full piece of molding. But I'm not doing that. I just want that shape. This being at the very top, and then this sort of curving down to the very bottom, okay? So this is where now we can decide over here where I would like my toolpath to be positioned within inside my material. It is exactly like positioning a 3D model in your material, but there is no 3D model, so it's just positioning my toolpath. At this point, I'm going to put just a little bit of space at the very top of this, just so that you can see that I'm actually putting my molding toolpath inside of my material with a bit of material at the top and a little material at the bottom, okay? So it's actually inside the middle of my material-ish. Now with the molding toolpath, I have the choice to use a finishing tool and then also a clearance tool. And the clearance tool is a lot like a roughing tool for if you're cutting a 3D component, where you're going to use that tool and hog out most of the material before you go in with a nice round tool to get all that detail. And in this case, we're going to use both of those. We're going to use a finishing tool and a clearance tool. So my finishing tool, because this shape doesn't have a whole lot of definition to it, I literally can use a 1/4 inch ball nose end mill. And I'm going to go ahead and vary my step over. Now, most of the time, a step over is very consistent when you're choosing a tool, right? You're setting the distance between each path. Well, in this case, as I come with a molding toolpath, as I come down the side of something, I can tighten up that toolpath to give me a nice, smooth finish. So I have that option here, so we're going to turn that on. And I only have skipped flat regions here because I have currently selected using a clearance tool. If I turn that off, then it won't show up. If I turn it back on again, then that option is available to me. Also, it's available to me because I have machine flat areas turned on. If I don't have access to that, but I have use the clearance tool turned on, then I'm not going to be able to see that unless I turn on machine flat regions. So what's nice about this roughing toolpath is that not only can I remove a lot of the material, but I can also use this tool to clear off any of the flat areas of my molding toolpath before I go in with my my finishing tool, okay? And that will save me time, and I'm gonna get a much nicer finish because I'm using that nice flat tool. I won't get any little cusps along the way, so I don't need to think about that when I'm setting up my step over for my bull nose, okay? So I'm gonna use a 1/4 inch end mill to do that with. Upcut, typically if I'm going to do a roughing toolpath. I'm going to use the machine flat region, so especially the top here. Now remember, this is sunk into the material just a little bit, so this top bit is going to be flattened with the end mill, but it's only going to use the ball nose to do the areas where there's any kind of curve to it. So that's kind of nice. With that, I wanted to make sure that I turn on the skip flat regions, because when I'm calculating my finishing pass, I want to make sure that it knows that I don't want it to go near those flat areas. Fair enough. I'm not going to use ramp or plunge moves, and when I'm using that roughing pass or that clearance pass, I want to leave behind a little bit of material, but it's not going to leave that material behind where it's gone ahead and flattened it off with that end mill, okay? That's important to remember. I don't need to worry about sharp corners because it's a round tool or a round shape, so it doesn't matter. With the boundary offset, now this is one of those sections of this tool that you're going to want to play around with a little bit. There's all kinds of different techniques to use this. And what we're doing is we're going to overcut your cross-section shape. So you can give it a particular boundary offset if you'd like to, or you can have nothing, or you can get it to automatically create one for you, which in this case we're going to do that, because what that's going to allow it to do is actually cut across where my dowel hole is going to be, because that's where the extra material is going to be removed. And also it's going to do the same thing down here at the very bottom of my circle for me. And we'll see that once we calculate our tool paths. Now sometimes you're going to want to have a zero boundary offset, but add like a little leg to the bottom bit here maybe, so you actually cut outside of your shape a certain distance, whatever you decide the distance of that leg is going to be. And I use that technique quite often if I'm going to be doing something like this and I'm going to roll up onto the top of it. If I end up using a boundary offset and I have a much larger patch of flat space at the top, and I add a boundary offset to that, then it might leave a little tiny lip in there. So what I might do is extend my cross section out a little bit from the bottom, and not on the top, so I'm making use of whatever flat areas at the top of my material. But I also get to overshoot a little bit at the bottom, so that way I'm clearing out some material there. And I do that quite often. If you looked at the music box that I created a while ago with the molding toolpath to create the heart in the middle, I think I did that exact same thing there. So if you're interested in that, have a look at that free project. Now we're just going to go ahead and calculate that now, and we'll see what we get. So you'll see up here at the top, there's our toolpath, the resulting toolpaths. And if we hide the clearance one, or not the clearance one, excuse me, but the finishing one, you'll see what we get for a nice toolpath there for the clearing. So we're going to clear out all that material before we go in with this finishing toolpath. And again, you'll see here, the area that I said to be sure not to touch those flat areas, it's not actually going to touch the top of this with that ball nose, because it's already removed all that material for me. So I'm going to have a little bit of time savings there. So let's have a look at just this one toolpath. So we're going to go in and we're going to rough all that out. That looks really great. And then we can have a look at our visible, or our finishing one. You'll see that we've gone actually outside of that. That's that automatic offset, the boundary offset that we've used. It's gone out a certain distance to clear that out. And if we preview this next visible toolpath, it's going to clean that up quite nicely for me. And that looks just like half of a yo-yo without the dowel hole in the middle. Now I want to show you another quick little technique that you can employ if you'd like to. If I go into my 3D view and I look straight down on my material, I can reset my toolpath actually, just because I don't want to see that there. Let's close that down. Re-show our vectors again. If I reselect these, so I'm going to select both of these inside circles and then that one cross section. I can combine both of these halves of the yo-yo into one or into two toolpaths. So let's just go ahead now and, we need to go back in and have the toolpath open while we do that. There we go. And let's calculate that. And you'll see that in the 3D view, what's happening. Now we have the two toolpaths that are going to take care of both halves of our yo-yo. And I think we're going to be good to go. That's perfect. So you can see where that comes from. Again, creating a 3D component with 2D vectors in VCarve Desktop or Pro. And along with this, it's going to be quite efficient to cut to, because that tool is actually going to go round in circles, not doing a raster or an offset toolpath that might look a little bit funny. This literally is going to clean it up really nice for me. And when it came to this yo-yo, I had to do very little sanding at all. It turned out near perfect. So just keep that in mind too, that when you can use the molding toolpath to save you some finishing time, I'd suggest you have a look at it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to maximize the 3D view for a second. And so we'll go to our 2D view. And I'm going to go and drop down our Sheets tab here. And I'm going to look for the yo-yo sheet. Now this is the actual sheet that I created or I made to cut this yo-yo. And we're going to see exactly what I just showed you a second ago. If we tile our views here, let's have a look. If we turn on our 2 tool paths here, and let's preview those. There's the clearance and there's the finishing. We just saw that. Now for the fun of it, what I decided to do was to add in a little bit of a detail to this, which is the fluting toolpath. And you'll see in a second that it makes this nice little sort of half swooshy thing on the top. I thought that looked pretty neat. Just to add a little bit of a detail. Of course, you can add whatever decoration you want to the top of this. It can't be a 3D component because you can't project onto this because it's not a 3D model, don't forget. But you can cut into this if you want to. And I'll show you that quick toolpath so you'll see what I've done. I gave it a start depth. Now, just like we saw a second ago on my demo sheet, I actually sunk this down inside of my material a little bit. So I made sure to reflect that distance in my start depth. My fluting depth is going to be 0.1 of an inch. I'm using a ramp at start. I'm going to do a linear ramp, and then I'm just going to go ahead and calculate that. And you'll see that when I preview that visible toolpath, I'm going to get this nice little swoosh in there using a ball nose end mill, which I think looks really good. And plus, I'm going to use that ball nose in there anyway, right? For that, for the finishing of the sides of my yo-yo. So why not use that to make a little bit of a detail? I have the dowel hole. Now what you are going to want to do is make sure that you check this dowel hole fits whatever dowel you can get. Now doing a little bit of research online with sort of a old school, the OG of yo-yos, you're going to want to use a hardwood for the center of this. And in my case, I've used a walnut dowel in there. So it's a nice piece of hardwood. And that should give me sort of a nice spinning action without wearing out my string too quickly. So, but when I ordered these though, I needed to make sure I measured them correctly. I ordered 8mm dowels, but they ended up being 7.7 millimeters. So they're a lot smaller than what I expected. So make sure that you change this pocket toolpath for the dowels to be the right size that you need. And you can either use the pocket allowance to make that a negative pocket allowance to make that hole a bit smaller, or what you can do is actually just redraw a circle, open up this toolpath, select them, recalculate them, and then you should be okay. Let's just go ahead and preview that. And there we go. And we're going to cut right through. And the last one is our cutout toolpath that we're going to do. Now I've added in some tabs. Now I'd like to just talk about my tab placement for a second. You'll see in the 2D view that they're off on 45, or they're off like, at what? Not 45, but they're on an angle. I did that for a reason. I'm going to cut these, I have cut these in maple, and I knew that the grain was going to be either orientated up and down or left to right. And I didn't want those tabs to fall on the grain where the grain actually passed right through the tab, and that would give me weak tabs. And I didn't want to put 4 tabs because I didn't want to do a ton of sanding to get rid of them. I wanted to try and keep the round shape as much as I could. So I put those on those locations on purpose, again, to kind of make sure that the tab was sort of 45 degrees to the grain, whichever way I ended up setting up my material. I thought that was a smart idea. They did hold really well, so I think that worked out really well for me. So let's close this down and let's preview that visible toolpath that was turned on. And then we'll preview that and we'll see that there are the tabs. So that's pretty much all we need right now to go ahead and get this cut on the CNC machine. Now let's go ahead and look at a little montage of me actually cutting this and putting it together. Well, there you have it. That worked out really nice. I'm happy with that. But as a bonus, we're going to include in one other toy for you. Now, our friend Dean from Dean Makes was by, and he showed us how to make a spinning top just like this. So I'm going to walk you through his file that he used to actually cut this spinning top and launcher. Now, interestingly enough, this shape was made using the molding toolpath, and I'll show you how that was done. So right now, what you can see on screen is that same file in VCarve Desktop. Now what I've gone and done is I've hidden all of the extra sheets except for the one that's called spinning top. So a minute ago we saw working in yo-yo. We'll look at these others in a second. Now, Dean used exactly the same process that I showed you a minute ago to create the two halves of this spinning top. And we decided to use a brass rod to hold it together, which is you know, it looks good, it's pretty classy looking, and it actually functions really, really well. So these are his cross sections that he used, and then he also spun them around this center circle. So if we look at his tooling, we're gonna tile our toolpaths, but instead of left to right, tile our windows. Instead of left to right, like we saw a minute ago, I'm gonna go top and bottom. That way it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, so let's just have a peek at this toolpath for the bottom of the spinner. So we've got the bottom clear and the bottom sweep. If we open that up, you'll see he did exactly what I did, except for through a little bit of trial and error, we noted that you needed to add a little bit of a gap at the bottom, not necessarily the top, to give us this sidewall. So when you glue these two together, you have a nice sort of surface there. It really helps to hide that glue line, but also it functions really well. It helps for the actual rotation of this particular design. So that comes in handy. He used the 1/4 inch end mill for his or 1/4 inch ball nose for his finishing tool, just like I did. Varied his step over. He used a large clearance tool, just like I did as well. And he used the automatic boundary offset. And we can go ahead and calculate that. And we can preview those visible tool paths. And you'll see we get exactly what I had done earlier with the yo-yo, but for this particular shape. We can do the same thing for the next tool, the next part of it. So this is the top part of the top. Anyway, there you go. Same setup as before. We can calculate that, and then we can preview those tool paths, and there we have it. We've got that. Now he went ahead and did it was his cutout pass, but we're going to look at the dowel first. So we're going to put the dowel hole in there first. We can preview that tool path, and there's the dowel hole there. And then we have the profile for the cutout pass. Now, when he did this, he decided that he was going to hold this down with double-sided tape, not with tabs. That way, he didn't have to worry about trying to sand off those tabs. He wanted to keep it very, very round, which you can see it is exactly that. So when you glued those up, things came together quite nice. We threaded in the dowel, and then we had to drill a little bit of a hole for the string for the launcher. Now let's have a look at the launcher. So if we drop down our sheets, and we hide the spinning top, or look at the launcher, excuse me, and we'll go over to that sheet. And then we may as well just go ahead and hide that spinning top sheet. You'll see that we have this launcher here. Now it's quite a nice little design, cut in maple. It's a pretty simple cutout. It's just a profile cut with a hole in the middle, a big hole. But the interesting part is this bit right here, where the actual spinner or the spinning top kind of threads through it. How can we actually do that? Well, Dean had a really neat idea where what he had done is he created a fixture. And I've got the fixture right here that he used. So what this will allow him to do is pocket out this middle bit. He can then go ahead and align that launcher to the middle. And because we're going to zero off the same location, then all we need to do is make sure we zero the Z off the top of this, and we can cut that hole where it belongs. So if you look at this, we have the fixture, a sheet called fixture here. So we can cut a fixture. And then we also have the drill hole. So we turn that on, we go ahead and zoom out a little bit there. You'll see that this sheet here is the zoom hole, or the zoom hole sheet, is the actual drill hole sheet. And so you can see that that's where this lines up. Now, if we copy and paste that vector from this sheet to that sheet, they will line up perfectly. So as long as you zero off the same XY location and then reset your Z off the top of this, then you'll be totally fine when you go ahead and mount this in there and go to cut that hole. Now that's pretty much all we need to do to make a launcher. So let's see how Dean went ahead and did that when he was cutting those on the CNC. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the assembly of this spinning top. So Dean used a brass rod to hold the top and the bottom together, which worked out really nice. Drilled a tiny hole in the top for us to thread the string through, which we'll talk about in a second. And then the point was created just using our sander that we have here, our belt sander. And we just kind of sanded it down. Brass is pretty soft, so it didn't do a bad job. Maybe we could have came to a little bit more of a point, but hey, it spins pretty good. So that's quite nice. Now, let's show you how this all kind of works together. So we've got the launcher with the hole in it, and we have a piece of just regular everyday string that I happened to find. And I just added a piece of dowel to the end. Now, if I wanted to get really fancy, I could make a nicer version of this, but for right now, it's quite practical. It does the job. So let's just go ahead and feed this in here. And on the end of the string, what I did so it didn't fray is I added a little piece of tape to it, just to kind of like the end of a shoelace. And so we kind of push it in the little hole there, but don't go too far through. Top tip for you, because if you do that, then you're going to end up getting caught on the way. And all I do is just spin it up. And then I can just go ahead, when I'm all ready to go, set it on the table and go. And there we have it. Spins really well. That's pretty slick. I can have a lot of fun with that. Now, what I'd like to do is before we end this video, I would like to talk a little bit about the yo-yo. A couple things I didn't point out, I forgot to, is that this is real proper yo-yo string that I bought from Amazon. It's the real thing. You're going to want to use that. You're not going to make your own. It won't work. You need the real McCoy. And the gap here between the two halves of the yo-yo are about 5 millimeters apart. 4.5 to 5 millimeters is what they recommend on the old internet. So if you keep that in mind when you're assembling it, then that would be the best. Okay? Now, if you have any questions about this project or any comments or anything I could have done a little bit better or any resources I could use or you want to share with people, please leave a comment below. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, please do. We're going to be sharing all kinds of great new content over the next years that you're going to want to be part of. So in the meantime, I'm going to take my yo-yo and get a little practicing in so I can show my kid at home how good Dad is at using a yo-yo.